Hunting by Stars. Chapter 26. Reunion. French. The next morning I was woken before sunup, or at least I would have been if I had been capable of sleep. Instead, I had sat in my bed all night and willed my heart to keep working. It felt fragile and frantic, like it was pulled so tight that any palpitation bigger than a blip would tear the tension and it would all come unzipped. I would be left with shreds of muscle, like old wallpaper pulled to the waistcoating. I saw her eyes, Sunny's eyes, in every speck that wandered across my vision, in every corner of the dark room. Worse than being judgmental, they were sweet, steady, familiar. I had already decided that it would never happen again, could never happen again. If it came down to hauling someone else in or giving up my life, I would lay mine down. There was no point in surviving if I had to hunt again. There would be nothing of me left to save. There was only one other time I had felt this rotten. That was really the only word for it. It wasn't just the feeling of loss or frustration or grief. No, those feelings came when you still had a self for them to bounce off. I felt like the part that I knew to be me was bruised, caving in, gone rotten. I'd felt this way the day I'd looked a man in his eye and shot him. It was months ago now, after the traitors, like you, my brain reminded me, had taken Riri, and one had ended up falling off a cliff with her still in his arms while trying to escape. When I got there, having caught up to them too late, I ran back to the camp where the second man was tied up, defenseless, like a dog on a lead. I raised the rifle, hands steadier than ever, and took a full breath before pulling the trigger. In that moment, it felt right. I felt right. But later, that breath would haunt me. Something had changed. I had cut off part of myself that would never grow back. That's how I felt now, only this time it was deeper. Once again, I'd had a choice. But this time, I had condemned a kid, one of us, to death, as certain as I'd sent the traitor off with the bullet. And that had been quicker. There were footsteps in the hall, turning the corner, then in front of my door, two sharp raps with knuckles. Do some, get presentable. Presentable meant clothed, maybe bathed, and silent. I was still dressed in my gray scrubs, so that was fine. I rinsed my mouth out with water and a squeeze of toothpaste, and I was totally on board with the silent part. I closed the door behind me and followed the watchman along the hallways, across the common room, empty, thank God, and up the stairs. This was it. Today I was being hand-delivered back to my family. I put that thought first, ahead of the haunting images from yesterday, and if I was being honest, I was glad I was going to be able to walk away from Mitch, at least for now. After yesterday, I was sure he was lost to me forever. I longed for the chance to grieve him out in the woods. Here, the watchman stood in front of a meeting room. I had been about to turn toward the prep room, but I stopped and walked toward him instead. Through the open door, I was greeted with the unnerving sound of friendly tones coming from evil incarnate. Good morning, Agent Francis, Mellon said, and this time she had a genuine smile on her face. Let me just say, we are all so pleased with the results of your final test. I couldn't look her in the eye. I burned with shame at the thought of the little girl walking under the shadow of the school's front gate, so I nodded and hung my head as if with humility. Now let's debrief, shall we? She spun in her chair after indicating that I should also take a seat at the round table. Pulling back the chair, I checked out the others in the room. Mitch, wearing a suit and a nervous edge to his features, a woman with an open laptop, and an older man, hair still wet from the shower, his face gray and freshly shaved, a pair of round gold-framed glasses magnifying his dark eyes. He seemed familiar, but I couldn't place him. I'd probably passed him in the hallway, or maybe he worked in the kitchen. I sat and folded my hands on the table, trying to be present, trying to breathe and move like a normal person. Agent Parisian, if you please. As Mellon spoke, the woman with the laptop began typing. Yes, of course. He referred to the papers in front of him on the wood surface. The prospects approached the scenario camp at approximately 11:35 a.m., coming from the northwest. And then I recognized him. Oh my God, I recognized him. Both prospects engaged me at the fire. I found their initial contact adequate. Though they may have been exhibiting nerves, it didn't seem suspect, as runners are normally apprehensive when interacting with new individuals. It was JP, cleaned up and speaking with less color, but it was him. He read out his notes about the storm and the shelter and the return to the clearing, but I couldn't focus on the details. My head was spinning too fast, which is hard to keep off your face. And Mellon was watching both Mitch and me closely as JP spoke. I wasn't sure what the play was, what anyone's play was, so I stayed still. But I could breathe better. I felt my vision clear up and my heartbeat steady. It was all a fake. The test was one big fake, and the runners were plants. This meant I hadn't become a traitor. Not really. I hadn't brought anyone in. Remembering Sunny, I did smile, quick and full. I didn't care that she was a plant, that she was with the school. Not right now. Not as long as I wasn't the cause of her being there. Agent Dewsum, do you have any notes for us? Mellon's voice cut into my reverie. No, ma'am. Other than that, the team was impeccable, and I was proud to work with them. Agent Parisian's acting was superb. We had no idea. Kiss ass, I thought. Mellon swiveled to me. Francis, any notes? In the bush, no one has real cigarettes anymore. Pardon? She looked confused. JP, Agent Parisian, smoked store-bought cigarettes. In the bush, people only smoke roll-your-owns, if anything. The clicking of keys from the note-taker's laptop reminded me that my suggestions would only help the recruiters in their work and make their decoys more convincing. Anything else? Mellon asked. I shook my head no, not telling them that the shelter was too perfect, their carelessness almost unbelievable. She wrote a few words in her notebook before continuing. Good note. We will adjust. Agent Parisian, any closing remarks before we adjourn? Two things of note that I specifically want to commend. Agent Dewsum worked hard to maintain the unity of the group and move us to the retrieval site almost completely on his own, even after I gave them an out to divide the group. He looked up at Mitch and gave him a slight nod. Mitch blushed. Agent Francis, on the other hand, he shifted his gaze to me. While he remained quiet for this part of the test, he did in fact secure Target 2 by physically holding her so that the retrieval team had no issues with loading her into the vehicle. Wait, what? Why were they calling Sunny Target 2? Why Target and not Agent? Yes, Mellon remarked. We were very pleased that both targets were apprehended. Excellent work to all. Her words echoed in my head. Targets, apprehended. She closed her notebook. The tiny sound was enormous, like a gunshot in the room. Only JP was a plant. The others, Teresa and Sunny, were the real targets all along. My vision got narrow again, my heart shrinking back under my ribs. All right, then. Everyone go grab some breakfast before we reconvene in the prep room for the mission at, let's say, 11 a.m.? She swooped up her notebook under her arm like a purse and left before we could stand. I couldn't have gotten to my feet just then, even if I had to. Mitch was already busy chatting Agent Parisian's ear off. Do you think a more forceful approach right off the bat would have worked better? What's it like living with them out there? They walked out together, leaving me alone at the table. I was a traitor. For a brief moment, I had been a guy who'd passed a setup. No harm, no foul. And now I was a traitor again. Only this time I was being praised for holding a kid still so the recruiters could grab her up, nice and easy. I thought about those moments in the bush, heading to the road. I had held her hand. If I hadn't been holding her hand, would she have run? Would she have been able to duck and cover and get away? She was hidden when we'd gotten to the site. Maybe she could have done it again. I remembered the feeling of her slipping away. No, being yanked away. And I remembered the way I had tightened my grip before we got to the road. And now that moment of shared uncertainty, of kindness on her part, how she had known I needed her hand just then, had been turned inside out. I put my forehead on the cool surface of the table and stayed there until the motion sensor lights clicked off. Eventually I got up, but I couldn't go eat. I went back to my room until it was time to meet in the prep room. I sat there on the edge of my bed, reciting messages to keep the others' thoughts from my head. I am still Marguerite Elliott. I will always be Marguerite Elliott. Don't come for me. Stay safe. As a reward for such a successful test run, we've decided to keep the team together. Mellon placed her notebook down on the table next to her and crossed her arms, still smiling. Wait, what? I started to attention. The team? Great news, right? Mitch called from the other side of the prep room. I spun toward him. Sure enough, he was back in his civilian clothes from yesterday, now genuinely dirty, his pack full and already on his back. I felt dread and panic skip into my gut. I had to hold it together. God damn it, if I were really who they thought I was, I would think this was good news, right? Yes, great news. You did so spectacularly together, we'd figured we'd give you another chance to excel. Agent Mellon opened a drawer in the desk and pulled out a piece of paper. This is a signed order that lays out the repercussions and corrective measures should these instructions not be followed. It has already been approved and will be executed at the first sign of trouble. She placed it on the desk, turned it around, and slid it across to me. With Mitch leaning over my shoulder, I read it out loud. 1. If the field officers do not join the target group or should they make any attempts to go AWOL, the target group shall be terminated immediately. 2. The field officers will be monitored by aerial and remote surveillance. Should it appear that the field officers have notified the targets in any way and made them aware of the plan, the entire group shall be terminated immediately. 3. If one field officer recognizes that the other field officer is not following instructions, they are required to break from the group and notify local recruiters. Location to be within 10 kilometers of target. In that case, the entire group shall be terminated immediately. 4. Should this mission be carried out successfully in its entirety, the field officers shall be returned to the school and promoted to agent and supervising agent status. However, should the mission fail, the entire group, including said field officers, shall be terminated immediately. Are we clear on what terminated means? Her voice was an echo from far away. Not captured, not brought back to the program, or even to the ward. Terminated in the field and without hesitation. Promoted to supervising agent? Oh man, this is going to be epic. Mitch was spastic with excitement. I had planned on just taking down whoever came with me, and Mellon's rules meant nothing. Anything I did left Mitch tied up or on his own would get him killed anyway. So I had only one real option. I had to reprogram him, get him to spit out all the brainwashing so we could run together. It was to be the biggest recognizance mission I have ever been handed, especially now, at the very last minute with no time to plan for it. And maybe Agent Mellon knew the impossibility of the situation I was in now, the one she had put me in. Of course, the real problems would begin after we'd gotten away, when I'd have to convince Rose not to slit Mitch's throat for being a traitor in the first place, if we ever got to her, and to make sure the others trusted him enough to allow him to travel with us. I wasn't so sure I could convince them to trust me to begin with, not after yesterday. No one has to know French. No one ever has to know. But I would know. I wondered if I looked different. I ran a finger down the small fold of my cheek from the laceration I'd gotten trying to find my mother. Mitch pulled off his bag to pack some water, and I remembered something. You still have the GPS tracker? I asked, trying to sound nonchalant, because you know they'll find it. This is a longer mission, and they're no fools. If I could make sure we weren't tracked, it would buy me more time and space to figure things out. The device from yesterday has been removed from the bag, Mellon answered quickly, letting me know my questions were not welcome. Enough, time to go. Soon we were loaded back into the van, going over our story to make sure it fit together seamlessly. Seams could be ripped. What will you say about the Institute? Only that I was held without speaking to anyone the entire time, but I was fed and had access to water. And did you see any others inside? No one. I heard voices, but that's about it. And what did they say? Not much, but they sounded content. Excellent. After hours of driving, with one break to empty our bladders on the side of the road, the vehicle stopped, and we jumped out the back and into the day I had been dreaming of for weeks. We checked the map for final directions, making sure we're pointed in the right way, that we understood where the targets had been last sighted, then burned the paper and buried the ashes under a silver birch who watched with knotted eyes. The rest of the day was walking, nothing but movement and the soft torture of knowing I was getting closer with every step. Every muscle in my body wanted to shape the movements of run. I just wasn't sure in which direction. I'm hungry, Mitch said. I had heard this 4 times in the last hour alone. And tired. Finally, I stopped. Okay, this is as good a place as any. I dropped my pack and stretched my arms over my head. We have enough time to make a small fire and maybe a lean-to. Here? He looked around the endless trees, fallen and standing. There's nothing here. There's everything we need here. I pointed around my feet. Dry wood, level ground, heavy ferns for concealment, everything. What are we going to eat? Okay, now he was starting to piss me off. I tried to remember that he hadn't even made it out of the suburbs when we first ran. This was all very new for him. All right, listen, you know as well as I do that we have to do this right, and showing up with full bellies after running away from the school is not exactly realistic. How would they even know? He kicked at his bag like a kid. Trust me, they notice things like that. I sighed. I'll make you some cedar tea. It'll fill you up a bit. It's got a lot of vitamins, too. Whatever. He folded his arms across his chest. I walked the perimeter, wishing we had some bells to hang so we weren't vulnerable. It hadn't registered yet that we were the ones people should be setting alarms for. I avoided Mitch with work. I found a balsam poplar with not too much debris underneath and lower branch sturdy enough to hold the crossbeam I'd forged from the wreck of a jack pine lying nearby. Then I collected enough branches to latch together and crisscross them on either side. Mitch sat nearby while I worked. I was frustrated, but then I saw him making the small motions one does when they feel overwhelmed in the bush, the way you start to orient. He picked up a snail and let it crawl over his finger. He peeled a patch of moss off a tree and sniffed it. He took a deep breath and held it for 10 counts. I left him alone to this important work. By the time I set out to collect the ferns that would finish the walls and provide cover, he was back at my side. I don't mean to be this way, you know. And how's that? I kept working. Useless. He plucked a small plant and held it up. Is this right? I looked up from my stoop. Sure. His face was painful with the need for approval and laid bare with embarrassment at the same time. I stood up. You'll want to gather fuller ferns like these. I pointed my lips at the pile at my feet. And avoid the ones with red leaves at all cost. Poison ivy, right? Right. You don't want to be grabbing those with your hands. And we sure as hell don't need to be sleeping under a roof of them either. He started laughing, an odd bubble of sound he wasn't used to producing. Hey, remember when Uncle Ford passed out in a full patch of poison ivy? I paused. Holy shit, yeah, he rolled around in there too. It was in his mouth, for God's sake. Probably dreaming about his neighbor again and started making sweet love to the bush. He closed his eyes and moved his head side to side, mouth open, tongue sticking out. I laughed hard. Yeah, his whole head swelled up. He looked like a fricking monster for days. And then Mom, she got calamine lotion in his eyes when she was trying to help. He was having trouble getting the words out. She was laughing so hard she couldn't keep a steady hand. I remember it as clear as day, us rolling around on the floor in our matching pajamas in fits while Mom cackled over her brother, who was slumped, red and blubbering at the kitchen table. I wiped water from my eyes. I learned my best swear words from him that day. She damn near pissed her pants. Mitch was laughing so hard he started tearing up too. It was contagious. Soon we were bent over, wheezing. Oh my God, it felt so good. Like the weather had suddenly warmed up and there was more than enough food waiting and there was nothing to fear. For just a minute, I was with my big brother and we were happy and free. For just a minute, everything was open and possible. I watched him try to compose himself and break out in another fit of giggles. If only I could make things stay like this. But before I could will it away, I saw him leading the way to the road, Teresa and JP on his heels, and then me walking hand in hand with Sonny. He didn't hesitate then, did he? No, he took charge and finished the mission. 3 for 3, every Indian accounted for. All the laughter was knocked out of my body. Grab any dry branches you come across for the fire. Aha, sure thing, boss. He saluted me, dropping a few fronds as he did. Eventually, the shelter was done. It was a little pathetic looking, but it would do. We rolled out a tarp on the ground inside and pinned another over the top in case of rain. Or worse, hail. Hail these days was bone-shattering, like even the sky was digging for marrow. All right, let's get some water boiling. I made the fire and picked the cedar and filled the small cast iron pot, just big enough to hold a cup and a half. Mitch watched everything I did, so I did it all a little slower than usual. Neither of us talked, and it was a comfortable silence, the kind that lets you learn, lets you teach. Hey, French? Yeah? Did you ever see Mom again? Is that why you were looking for her before when you were hurt? He spoke low, as if hiding the question from his own ears. Nah, never. I stirred the pot. But I never stopped looking for any of you, and I found Dad. I turned a bit to see how this landed on his face. I'd been saving that information for when I needed it, for when I thought I could do the most work of tearing him down. He pulled back a bit when others would have leaned in. He leaned so far back he had to put an arm behind him to hold him up. Oh, he's out here? I was cautious. How much of Mitch was in this question, and how much was Agent Dewsum? No way to tell. Yep, lost a leg, but he's okay otherwise. His leg? Seriously? His eyes jumped around the clearing, landing everywhere but on me. His lip twitched. He put a hand over his mouth to cover the small movement. Yeah, it's not like we're out here playing tag or some shit. This is life and death. Things get messy. Things go missing. I tried to stay calm, like I didn't have any skin in the game anymore. Well, he's lucky it was just a leg, Mitch responded. You have 2 of those suckers, not like losing a heart or something. Yeah, well, he has 2 sons too, and look at how that turned out. Mitch gathered his words carefully. His voice was shaky, and he paused in weird places. Are we going to... is he with the target group? No idea. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I waited for him to offer a rebuke or question my newfound loyalty. When he didn't, I decided to push it a bit. I handed him his tea and grabbed my backpack. I rummaged around in the front pocket, threw it on the ground, and sat on it. Mitch, do you remember the treehouse? It took him a few seconds to answer. What treehouse? Like the one we were about to sleep in? I didn't believe him. He knew. How could he forget the last time we were together, when we were both running in the same direction, when he'd been taken in and changed? I balanced my elbow on my knee, straightened out my arm in his direction, and slowly opened my fist. Balanced on my palm was a small green army man, the kind that used to come in bags of 100, the kind that stood on small, usually uneven plastic platforms. Mitch looked up from blowing on his tea to let it cool down. Well, what's that? I didn't answer right away, watching his face, but he had to put space between us, more miles than this forest had. I took a deep breath and told him what was really our coming to story, how we'd gotten here and how we'd become who we were. We had lost Mom in the city, and we kept walking together. We ended up in someone's backyard in the suburbs. The houses were all empty then. The people had moved on or were made to move on. We looked through some of the places for food and supplies, and then we found a treehouse. Remember that? I know you remember because that's where you broke your leg and got brought in. He sipped his tea, eyes downcast. And we fought. I'll never forget it, yelling and carrying on like we were regular brothers in a regular world, but we weren't. We were too loud. And then you pulled out this bag of chips. I was an idiot kid, so that's all it took to make me feel better. Imagine an orphan already so used to messed up shit that chips made me smile. And then they came. I stopped, remembering the recruiters' whistles filling the space in the yard and every cell in my head. I remembered the way Mitch had reeled in his fear so he could do what he did next. You told me to escape. You told me they know someone's up here, just not how many someones. And then you made me jump into the trees. I stayed there for a long time with my eyes closed, but I could still hear everything. Yelling, whistles, banging, your leg breaking, and then after a while, there was no more noise, and I came down. Before I left, I found this army man lying in the grass. He kept his eyes down, but his shoulders shrugged slowly. I couldn't tell if he was being dismissive or reverting back to that kid who had been taken away. I knew it was yours. You'd snagged it from some ransacked store, kept it in your pocket. So I picked it up and put it in my pocket, and I've had it ever since. Why are you telling me this? He sat still, but the muscle in his jaw flickered. No reason. I tipped forward and placed the little man by his foot. Just talking. I got up and carried my bag to the lean-to. I wasn't tired. There were too many thoughts in my head, too many possibilities, but I wanted to give him some time on his own to think, to really, truly be in those memories. Who knew how often he got to do that at the school? My body must have relaxed into the familiar smells and chill of the woods because I was asleep before he made it inside. In the morning, there was a moment of peace, lying there with the world waking up around me when I forgot why I was there. I was just plain old French, out in the run, but still inside. And then reality poured into my consciousness, and I felt my bladder pinch. I rolled over. Mitch was beside me, his face more familiar to me now in sleep. I wondered what he was dreaming about. Then I wondered if he could dream at all anymore. I carefully slid out of the shelter and into the day. It was still so early an owl hooted indignantly from a nearby tree. The morning birds hadn't yet started their daily ablutions. I relieved myself inside a blueberry bush grown vascular with strangular vines and clapped my hands to warm them up. Since we weren't in any real danger and we were still far away enough from the group, I decided on a small morning fire. The pit was cold. Mitch must have put out the fire before he came to bed. I worked until there was a small bundle of flame in the center of the ashes, just enough to heat up some water. I didn't have anything to add to it, but I could feel good to drink in warmth. I'd get some boiling and then wake Mitch so we could pack up and get going. As I positioned the small vessel in the center of the flames, something caught my eye. I grabbed a stick and moved the ashes around. There, melted to a nub, the platform warped enough to curl, was the plastic army man I'd left with Mitch. Fuck, I sighed. Well, so much for that. I picked it up and slipped it into my pocket anyway. Now it was a reminder of the second time I saw my brother for the last time. And when the water was bubbling, I went to the shelter to wake Agent Dewsum.